So hello and welcome everyone. My name is Frank. I'm the currently seated president of Tiny Home Alliance Canada, entrepreneur and content creator. It's great to see you all here for this panel discussion around our beloved tiny home industry. Today we'll hear from experts in tiny home construction and from the experience of those living in tiny homes today. Before I introduce our panel, I want to just offer a few words to sort of set the stage. So the tiny house movement is enjoying something of a renaissance at the moment, with a noticeable number of people moving towards minimalism, leading to a growth in tiny homes in abundant shapes and even sizes. You might have recently seen your neighbors building a tiny home for their friends or family in their backyard, or maybe you've noticed more tiny home photos on Pinterest, Instagram, and Facebook being posted with increasing regularity. What you may find interesting is that they have existed in some form for thousands of years. It's not the case that people have only recently thought about small house living. It's quite the opposite, actually. So when did tiny houses first appear? Cast your minds back to history class in school. Yurts from the East and teepees from the Native Americans were small, ultra-small structures that had many of the required components for independent living. Throughout history, small houses have always existed as a practical and functional dwelling, no more or less than was necessary. It has only really been in the last century that houses started getting bigger. A big house was, and still is to many people, a status symbol and storage space for all the stuff they don't use. Fact, tiny homes are legal in Canada, but there are still a lot of challenges to overcome. Tiny home owners and those looking to make the switch find a new set of challenges depending on the area in which they plan to live and what type of home they choose to build or purchase. The future looks promising, though. The tiny home industry has never been stronger, and that strength is promoting rapid growth. And with that said, I'd like to introduce to you today's panel. So first off, we have Pamela Robertson. Pamela, raise your hand, of Tiny Home Alliance, a Tiny Home Alliance board alumni and co-owner of Sunshine Tiny Homes located in British Columbia. We also have Josh, raise your hand, current Tiny Home Alliance board member and co-owner of Tiny Footprint Homes in Ontario. We also have Barbara Rowe, blog writer and board member at Tiny Home Alliance. Barbara lives in a tiny home near Lethbridge, Alberta. And last but certainly not least, we have Adrienne Fedrigo, current vice president at Tiny Home Alliance. Adrienne lives in what we might consider a large tiny home near Naramata in BC, and we'll let her explain that one a little later. So thanks to you all for being here today to share your thoughts and your wisdom with us. I wanted to start things off with perhaps both a most general and maybe pressing question facing our industry is, groups around the world advocate for regulating and increasing the legalization of tiny homes and minimalist type dwellings in general. So my question would be, what is a tiny home specifically? At what point is a home too big to be considered tiny?
I've generally heard that a tiny house is under 500 square feet. So whatever kind of dwelling that is, whether it has a foundation or on wheels or just even a skid in the backyard. So yeah, my general understanding is it's about under 500 square feet.
So is this a known number? Maybe even Josh or Pam can speak about that. Is there a known number? Because you hear a lot of conjecture about it. Is there some specific way we can identify what a tiny home really is? At what level it becomes not a tiny home anymore?
I mean, there's a certain point, and I guess from where I am in Ontario, each municipality kind of has their own different set of rules and regulations in terms of what they consider tiny. So a lot of places will have what's called like a minimum square footage. And you have to adhere by that. So a lot of places right now, they don't accept tiny homes in a sense where if you are under, say, 1,000 square feet, then you can't put that on there, right? So, but on the plus side, a lot of municipalities are changing. Speaking from for example, my municipality where I am, is hopefully going to pass the second dwelling zoning bylaw that they have to kind of change to allow tiny homes on properties. So without rambling on too much, I don't think there's a set definition. I think it's just kind of depending on what somebody considers tiny.
Speaking about that second dwelling zoning bylaw, that's almost a good segue into that, because the biggest question facing a lot of people looking into tiny homes and building tiny homes is, where do you put these things? Where can you, where are you allowed to, and how do you put it somewhere that you want, and legally kind of thing. So do you think this second dwelling zoning bylaw is going to catch on, and would that be a good solution to where do I put my tiny home?
Yeah, Pam, go ahead.
Yeah, no, so I'm on the West Coast. I'm in BC. The Sunshine Coast is pretty progressive, I think, compared to the rest of, Alberta and Ontario. Even the Sunshine Coast is progressive more so than other areas in BC, where I've had the privilege of, we have a lot of tiny houses, small foundational houses that are accepted. We have our auxiliary dwelling unit, language in the bylaws that state that it cannot be larger than 592 square feet. Tiny homes on wheels don't classify under that criteria because it's not a fixed foundational home. So our municipality has rejected tiny houses on wheels built to the RV standards. They will, however, entertain the park model or a tiny home that's modular or manufactured. So we do have quite a bit of leeway for that. But just to kind of broach on the tiny home, what size is defined as a tiny home. I hear anywhere between 400 to 500 square feet. If you post that on the community page in BC, people will argue what size is. I don't think there is a set term or a set definition of tiny house, but yeah, so that's my experience here in BC. We just actually are waiting on new bylaws on the Sunshine Coast Regional District to roll out. They're actually reducing the minimum width requirement on a standard like a primary house, which is also a big move in a good direction, because they're actually not, from what I understand, is they're not restricting size for a primary occupancy. So it's a lot of big changes kind of coming about here. And a tiny home could classify as a primary permanently occupied house, not on wheels, but the requirements for 1,000 square feet or up doesn't really apply here. So kind of interesting that way. And my journey, I'm a bit of a data miner when it comes to municipalities and what is and what isn't everywhere. And it's just interesting to see how kind of far behind a lot of municipalities are, like Josh, in your area, fighting for having just a secondary dwelling unit capabilities. We've long surpassed that. So I hope it does work out in your region, because it's really important.
I've known Ontario's been behind the 8 ball for some time, Pam. I've followed what you've been doing for a little bit time here now. So that's kind of what I like to use as leverage. And when I'm talking to building officials, planning, all the people I go in and talk to, is that BC as a prime example is way ahead of the game. Excuse me, in terms of allowing tiny homes and where they can go, and zoning bylaws and zoning amendments, and it's just there's so many rules depending on where you're going. It'd be nice if everything was just under one umbrella nationally, and I guess that's kind of where the CSA kind of helps, but we're going through that process as a headache in itself, but we can talk about that later if we have to. But everything being different from like Central Huron to Huron East. For me, for example, we build in Huron East. I live in Central Huron. They're 4 minutes apart, and they allow different things. So it's just like it I don't know. Sometimes it's tricky to kind of grasp what it is, but it's new too, right? It's not just new to us as builders and people buying them. It's new to the building officials in the area who have never dealt with something like this before. Like, it's new to them too. So it's you kind of got to take it as a learning curve with everybody. Hopefully they catch on.
You really need to get the big groups together, and not just in municipalities or in one province or another, It's got to be a full meal deal. And actually, there's as some work being done on that, is there not, Pamela?
There is, yeah, it's
Are you
really,
willing to speak a little bit to that if you can?
yeah, yeah, it's really heating up recently. So I've been working with a group of people, uh, Australia, Canada, the United States. I think we had a few attendees from Europe. I know that there was a woman who connected with Tiny Home Alliance Canada, Karen. She was, kind of chiming in, and I think she's still listening in. But anyhow, we're just kind of bypassing, because there's 3,500 in around 3,500 municipalities alone in Canada. It's a lot of groundwork. It's a lot of people, kind of hammering and chipping away at this sort of grassroots operation. So there's been a number of people, I'd say a good 30 to 50 people that are kind of directly involved to create an ASTM, which is a standard that kind of becomes a standard or a code for tiny homes all in itself, which I'm learning about it. So I'm not an expert in this, but my understanding is that it's something that, say, the National Building Code or the International, the IRC or the ICC, places can adopt these standards and implement them in, as can municipalities, as can provinces. Like it becomes something that's accessible and reachable. And if it's done well and it's done right, it just is an international or a global spectrum. So it's not even like you're cherry picking everything. It's just, it sort of broaches on all aspects. And we're, I believe, primarily focusing on tiny homes on wheels because it is the number one sort of issue. And it seems to be the one that gets kind of overlooked every time, because it's hard. It's harder, right? So I'm working with them. I'm bringing in some of the knowledge that I have through operating through the CSA standards, which I've now accomplished. Tiny Homes on Wheels, which is the RV series, the Park Model series, Mobile Manufactured Home series, and the Modular series, the A277. So I have an understanding of all the standards and, kind of taking and adapting different components of that and helping, bring that through, and maybe even formulating something that's, kind of morphs out of each of those standards. So kind of interesting, a little bit of a trek to go, but anybody can join, by the way. Josh, you're welcome to kind of
send me an invite.
Yeah, get in there, and they're just of the more the merrier. And right now it's kind of like, I think they're just doing a really sort of a focus group, and they're doing it primarily in the So we'll see what's kind of going to transpire, but things are moving forward. And I don't know. I just think sometimes having to go through every single different municipality all over Canada. Josh, I have 3 municipalities in a 1 hour and 15-minute stretch of land. It's like, and one hand doesn't know what the other hand is doing, and they all have exactly different criterias to meet and different,
right,
permits and different, ideas about what small hosts, like, it's just a mess. I think it's just a mess, but, and I discourage a lot of my tiny home purchasers to avoid 2 of the 3 areas, because it's, more condensed, and, the one region is more vast, is more places to kind of be discreet. So I kind of just, give them guidance and direction about that, but it's challenging because, in my region alone, I would need to do 3 meetings each time I do something. But fortunately, there's a board of directors for all the municipalities combined. So we kind of just present to them that way.
Yep.
But I've been doing this presentation and delegations for planning meetings, or, giving information to my immediate municipality since 2018. I just keep going back, and
Wow.
They're still just not convinced. So I think we're just going to go out and do this with the ASTM. And it's the Tiny Home Alliance, a USA, Janet Thome, that's kind of spearheading this operation. Just working with her to see if we can get somewhere without having to to do all of this extra work. I think it'd just be great to go or get organized, go and create something, and then go, hey, look what we have. Want some?
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
It's kind of
Yeah, for sure.
the idea of things. Yeah. So I get really excited about this stuff, but you know, it's a lot of work. It's a lot of communications. It's a lot of, you know, disappointments too, because things, you know, kind of get shut down or they get turned down. And so we just have to keep chipping away at it is what I think. So that's what we're doing. Yeah.
That's exactly it. No, that's fantastic. I mean, I don't know if you've heard of a building official around here, a different municipality about 45 minutes from where we are, told us that they introduced what's called a JM1. They introduced that January 1st. And what that does is that essentially combines, like, so during the permitting process of our build, because we're going through this whole CSA thing. So until then, we have to get permits on all our other builds, all our future builds. What the JM1 does is it intertwines kind of municipalities, to my understanding as well. Like, I'm still learning about this. So like our building official would then communicate with the building official for where it's going. And then they would be able to pass and accept everything between the two of them. It's just something, again, that we're just learning about as well. So I can't get too detailed because I don't know too much about it, but I think that would also help, you know, bridge the gap between, you know, where because we manufacture these tiny homes, so where they're being manufactured and where they're going, right? So it's, I mean, that's like the biggest hurdle most of the time, is depending where they're going, right? So thankfully, we've had everybody buying ours has a private piece of land that they've already acquired that they're doing it to. So it's the second dwelling, accessory dwelling, whatever you'd like to call it. There's different terms coined for the phrase. There's, you know, whatever, depending again what municipality you're in, how they like to talk about it. CSA doesn't actually recognize it as a tiny home. They like to call it small homes. So it's, again, everything's all over the place, kind of like what Pam was saying. It's different from region to region.
So getting these just, you know, it's one thing to have a product that people want, and that's really good for everything. And, you know, to have to go through all this trouble to get CSA approvals and whatnot. As a builder, as a business owner, what about as someone who's just purchasing a tiny home, or someone like Barbara or Adrienne who's living in a tiny home? And especially you, Barbara, you had quite some experiences and still do with, you know, where do you put your tiny home? Are you willing to speak to that a little bit? Like, you know, your first experiences when you first got into your tiny home, and you know, kind of the mess that was at one point.
Yeah. So I moved when I've got my tiny home, I was living at a campsite because it was the middle of winter and I needed somewhere that was actually open. And there's only one place, and pretty much south of Calgary, that's actually open all winter. So I moved there and stayed here with the hope that I would be able to find a piece of property to park my tiny house on. Had some friends that have property about an hour southeast of Lethbridge, or southwest of Lethbridge, in my ideal location. But had read their bylaws wrong. We figured, my friends and I, because they live in their motor coach and I live in my tiny on wheels, that it wouldn't be a problem to park both units on their land because they're registered and plated, and my tiny house is registered as a park model RV, so we figured it's not a problem. According to their bylaws, a dwelling on a property, you're only allowed to have one, and the dwelling in the definition means a place to eat, a place to sleep, and a bathroom, which of course we have all three. So we were breaking the bylaws because we had two dwellings on the property, even though we figured we were okay because we're trailers. And that's one of the nicer things. You can kind of flip it a little bit. You can use that to your advantage. So yes, I'm a tiny house, but yes, I'm an RV. So I can be in an RV park as well. But long story short, we had to be really nice to the council and plead our case, and we got a permit that lasted a year. So that was from September of 2021 to October of 20 to 21.
We're going to check the dates.
Yeah, I know. I'm like, oh my gosh, I can't think. And then after, basically in July, of last year. I was because it's a really small community and there's probably like a couple hundred people in town, and two neighbors over is the mayor and his wife. So it's Canada Day. I was over at their place. We are having a little barbecue and a get together and talking to them about land use bylaws and stuff like that. And he mentioned that he's getting a lot of flack from the community because I'm still there and they don't want me there. And he basically, in nice words, told me that if I wanted to reapply for the permit, it would be denied. And if I needed the permit extended, it wasn't going to happen. So basically, get out October 1st. So I had to leave. If I wanted to actually purchase land out there, though, here's where the land use bylaws come into play. My house would have to be permanently attached to the ground, and I would have to add on another 300 to 400 square feet to make it permissible, because the minimum requirements in that community is 800 square feet, no smaller.
It changes. So where are you now, and are you in a place that's more permanent?
Well, I'm back at the campsite again, because I didn't have anywhere else to go. Buying property, if you're looking at raw land, I don't know about other places, but I've talked to a few banks and they want half down. So if you're looking at, a $200,000 piece of land, you need $100,000 down payment, of which if I had that, I wouldn't be going to the bank. So I wouldn't need the bank because I've got the money. But so yeah, it's been a little tough. So I had to move back to the campsite again where I started, and it's okay. But I mean, it's a campsite and there's no grass, and my dog doesn't get to run free like she did on the acreage. And
Oh.
yeah, and I'm right close. I'm right next to the highway, which I have to deal with that highway noise all the time. So it's not ideal, but it is a place to live, and I'll be here until I can actually either find someone to co-loan on property or find a farmer out further west who has land who will rent me a space or a little chunk or something. Other than that, I'm here for forever.
Foreseeable future. What about you, Adrienne? How about you? What was your experience when you first got into your tiny home? Was it a little easier for you to get yours in place? You had a bit of a different experience with that.
A little bit different. So before we started building, I actually worked for our regional district. So I went in to talk to our planning manager. Him and I had many conversations, and I showed him pictures like, look, it's pretty and it looks like a house, like it's, it can blend in. And he just did not want to listen. He did not want to hear about it. So we built it anyway. I live in a regional district where it's very complaint based. So we rolled our house up anyway, and we've made ourselves cozy. I'm on my parents' property. So my parents have just over half an acre. So they have a decent size piece of property. We're at the tail end of residential, but we have farmland behind us, and then nobody who kind of lives on the other side. And then we do have a house next door, but they can't really see us. So we're in kind of a cushy spot. Our bylaws don't allow it because you're only allowed to live in an RV or be in an RV for up to 90 days. So we know we're good for 3 months out of the year. That's about it. But our neighbors all love us. So we've been fairly fortunate. We've plopped our house down. We've taken the wheels off. We've kind of settled ourselves in here and just kind of continue to play nice with our neighbors and hope that no one says anything. Our community is currently working on our official community plan, and I'm the vice chair on our board. And the other day I actually gave a presentation about alternative housing styles, and put up our house and showed an aerial view of our property and talked about how there's land leasing we can do, how tiny houses. I even showed a picture of a property with a yurt, and I was like, we need some alternatives because affordability, especially in our area, we live in a very fancy wine region, and we have a lot of vacation rentals and no housing, and people are just super fed up with it. So I'm kind of getting my chance to voice that tiny houses are a viable option. I'm very fortunate. We have a planner at the regional district. She is very on board with them. I've had her over to our house before. Like she's very encouraging of it. And so we tippy toe a bit around our planning manager, but I'm still trying to get my voice out there and what we can do. So yeah, other than that, we're kind of settled here.
So that kind of begs the question to any of the panelists here: wheels or no wheels? That is the question. Maybe as builders, what would you recommend? Or as tiny home owners, what would you recommend? You know, would you recommend somebody really just settle it down? Is there less problems with something that doesn't have wheels? Or is the ability to move the trailer around maybe less hassle because at least you can move to a municipality that allows you? So what would be your recommendation?
Well, so sorry, with our story, we went mobile because we had abruptly moved from Alberta to BC and it wasn't in the plan. And then when we moved out here was just the turn of the economy and we couldn't sell our house. And so we just got to a point where we wanted a house on wheels that was then going to be ours. And if we had to move, our house comes with us and we keep our environment, which we thought was super important for our kids. And so, and we just, love tiny houses. We needed to minimize too. And I'm like, I don't need a big house. My kids, when they're around, are literally like in my lap. I can't go very far without them being completely glued to me. And as they become teenagers, they want nothing to do with you. So I was like, what's the point of a big house? We'll just go outside. So that was our main reason for going with wheels.
Barbara, was it a choice for you, or were you thinking of, going to ground, so to speak?
For me, it was wheels on all the way, because in the planning stages, I really wasn't thinking about how hard it was going to be to move my house. It's 10 feet wide, 37 long, so I need something extra special to pull this. My pickup truck I have isn't going to cut it. And then after I realized, at 10 feet wide, I need permits. So that's an extra little thing right there. But the plan always was to have it, to live in it, and then find a piece of property, move it out there. And if I absolutely had to, wheels off, and I would attach it to the ground. Not right at first, just in case if I had like a big enough piece of property and I didn't like where it was, I could always find a farmer with a tractor, move it to somewhere a little bit better, and then try that out, and then move it somewhere else, and then move it somewhere else till I found a permanent spot on the property. And then, yeah, I would be willing to take wheels off and put it on a slab or something like that, and live in it from there, but still have the ability to put those wheels back on, and if I had to, get out of Dodge.
So for you builders, what you do, both of you, Josh and Pamela, you build tiny homes on wheels. Is there at any point that you would look at, would you build a tiny home not on wheels? Is you building a tiny home on wheels just a product of what your clients are looking for, or is it a choice?
So I build both. We've built a prototype. It's called a micro home. It actually had all the amenities, but was less than 100 square feet. So it actually didn't need to be permitted. We kind of like to go around that permitting process, right? So the RV series, tiny homes on wheels, otherwise fixed kind of negates that whole opportunity for people. So my clients are, my demographic is, generally single women, rearing retirement, have, selling their houses, and they're downsizing into something, that they can just hang their hat in and travel around, or take their home with them down to like Bee Snowbirds. You can actually just set up camp down somewhere in the States where it's nice and warm. So it really lends freedom to all my clients. And that is who we cater, is people who don't necessarily want to be tied down with big houses, big mortgages, but they want to have all their comforts of home. So we have, I would say a good 70% of the people who buy our tiny homes connect with landowners and, negotiate pad rent space or land space that they, either some will pay for the infrastructure ahead of time with a contract or an agreement with the property owners that it be a reduced rate for their monthly rent until that cost is absorbed, which is opportunity which I would have. I actually have a tiny home location already pre-planned on the place that I rent from now. It's 5 acres. It's beautiful, beautiful setting. Honestly, a lot of places where our tiny houses go, people wouldn't be living there if it wasn't for their tiny homes kind of being situated, right? Like you
It
get
makes
to
it
live in,
possible.
well, you get to live in some pretty opportunistic landscapes. When you have a tiny home, you kind of just nestle in, like, you know, there's waterfront property opportunities, there's farm and opportunities. You know, I live on a horse ranch. There's like 15 horses there. I'm blessed to live above the stable, but I have, you know, I can see from my front door, my little tiny spot, home spot. And, you know, I sit there and, you know, landscape in my mind, and I'm really excited about that. I have a progressive landlord who, you know, she welcomes the opportunity, and, you know, there's a lot of people who are willing to do what's necessary to help facilitate some of our displaced members of our very, you know, important communities. So I think tiny homes on wheels, because you don't have to go through all the bureaucracy, and if you, you know, kind of do all the right things as far as infrastructure, the septic, the power, the water, all those things can be permitted, but they don't have to go through municipal permission, right? So I don't know. I recently, because we've been asked very frequently for our tiny homes, you know, everybody gets really excited. They want to buy, like Barbara, a piece of land and put a tiny home on it. And honestly, that's the hardest thing that you can do.
It sounds so beautiful, though.
It does, but the tiny home RV is the one that's the crux. It's the part that makes it almost impossible virtually, right? So that being said, I've created the, you know, the hybrid of tiny homes, which is a manufactured mobile home, but it's exactly the same as a tiny house. So I've built through the CSA standards a travelable tiny home, but it meets the criteria of being a permanently primary occupied building with, you know, having, like the purchasers go through all the permitting process, and then, you know, eventually it's tie it down and take off the wheels and do all the financial or the foundational requirements involved with it. But
Yeah.
it looks exactly like a tiny house, and you know, people get what they want, and if they want to go through all the hoops and hurdles, they have that opportunity, right? So for some, it's very important to live a minimalistic lifestyle, and, you know, the tiny home movement and all that, this kind of, you know, facilitates that. So
Yeah. I've always said the minimalist idea is for people that are happy to live outside but still want to be a little cozy on the inside. You know, it's not
Yeah.
about living in your house and doing everything in your house and storing everything in your house and everything like that. It's about being close enough to outside that almost, you know, it's really being outside really is the most fun thing to do. So what do they do out in Ontario, Josh, as far as that? Are you seeing, because we are seeing a movement in Ontario for affordable housing. So it's surprising that the tiny home movement isn't taking off a little stronger there.
I mean, I have to be very careful in how I say this stuff, just because everything is changing and a lot of it is going in our favor. So I don't want to, you know, jump the gun and say anything premature that, you know, makes it come across as I'm expecting this stuff to happen. But for the most part, I mean, I guess circling back to the original question about wheels or no wheels, it's been mainly wheels, I guess, in a nutshell. If you're to, you know, make it black and white, it's been mainly wheels, but also a mix of on-site builds. There's the main people, I guess, our demographic, I guess, has kind of been scattered all over the place. We've had young couples as customers, single mothers with kids, retirees, wholesalers actually as well. Nobody really. Anyways, it's been, I guess, all over the place, and we want to be receptive to, you know, either wheels or no wheels, depending on what you need, right? So I'm not sure how banks operate across the country, but here they look a lot. They don't frown upon it as much if you are connected to the ground. So I can't say that it's easier to get a mortgage for these things if you're on the ground, but it's a little less hard to get a mortgage if you're on the ground. The bank looks at it as though you, you know, if you fault on a payment, they have to be able to collect something, right? And theoretically, if a house is on wheels and you fault on a payment or fall behind on a payment, or you just decide not to pay, you can just pick up and go. And then they have no way to, get their money out of the mortgage. So there's different reasons and different, whole situations that we kind of appease to. We try and take a personal approach with every customer as well, right? And trying to figure out what they really need, what they're using it for. The one couple just they housing in Ontario is so crazy right now, that they just flat out said, we're first time home buyers, we can't afford a home, this is what we want. And then we figured, going tiny, we'll be able to get everything we want and still be able to work within our budget. And that's one of the nice things too, right? Is that when you're building smaller, you can technically spend a little bit more if you need to, because you're not covering such a huge square foot area of like a nice tile, or a different wall covering, or you're spending $1 million on fancy lights and this, that, and everything else. And and then there's been the minimalists, who the ones that they want to have it under 8.5 feet, so they don't have to get the wide load permits, and she can tow it essentially wherever she wants to go, whenever she wants to go. And that's the more off-grid kind of approach that she's taking. She's got the composting toilet, she's got the holding tanks, she's got she propane mainly. Then those appliances are expensive. So it's everything adds up in the end. But it's either or for us as well. So whatever makes sense to the customer. Thankfully, I guess, kind of like Pamela said as well, our customers have also secured land prior to doing that. So whether it be on the back 9 of a friend's farm or somewhere like that, we're going again. I'm trying to think of ways I can say this without jumping the gun. It's cities, a close city, I guess, that is actually a city, comprised of like over 300,000 people. We're trying to get the first tiny home smack dab in the center of the city,
In the
for
middle
a
of the
customer.
city.
Yeah, like he lives in a very ritzy part of town, and the planning department is all worried about how it's going to look cosmetically. Is it going to look like a trailer? What's it going to look like? So we came through the process, between us, our design team, and their planning team, came up with a helical pile solution. So you install helical piles on this guy's property, who is renting out to this lady, our customer. And he's agreed to install helical piles in his backyard, which are just essentially giant screws, torqued to an engineered spec. So it goes through a whole engineer team, based on the gross weight of the home, right? So the engineer team figures out how many helical piles you need to install, and then each one gets torqued to a certain foot pound, and then we're likely, probably going to be craning these things in, with flatbed and then crane, just for easier install, because the city we're trying to get in will not allow trailers in the city. So we had to try and come up with a way around that. So that's our best solution, and thankfully they're hopefully gonna pass it. God damn it!
Well, no,
I don't know.
you're
Yes.
laughing at that solution, Josh, but it sounds like a good idea to me. Especially since we're used to being on a trailer, but if something doesn't have to be on a trailer, it really doesn't have to be. I know for myself, we're looking at some other construction techniques that involve doing things in a piecemeal sort of a modular way, where we create walls and we lift them up onto in specialized way, and we attach them together and build something without ever having to have a whole bunch of construction equipment and trailers and everything backing into the community, making noise and cutting off roads and all that stuff that people don't like about that stuff. So the idea of building a modular tiny home, being able to lift it onto a pad in the backyard, I think is a good idea. Does anybody disagree with that? That sounds, you're laughing, but I think it sounds like a great idea. I mean,
I don't mean to laugh. I only laugh because I'm trying to tiptoe around like using certain language, because like I said, everything and I'm sure Pam can attest to just the amount of changes that go on with different zoning codes and everything else. We have a good thing going right now. We're rubbing elbows with the right people. I just don't want to say anything that's going to come back and kick me in the rear end. So
Okay, well, we don't want Josh to jinx himself. We want everybody to be successful here. So let's move on a little bit and say, I really wanted this this webinar to be, not just about, the whole little bit of a history about tiny homes and where we are now, which is what we've been discussing, but now, these challenges that we're facing, they're actually being worked on. It's not like we're asking right now, what do we need to do to solve the problem? It's we're sort of working out the problems with, companies, people like Pamela and cohorts, working on ISTM ISO rules, and then people like Barbara, Adrienne, joining groups and trying to create with advocacy and trying to teach people about tiny homes and just sort of throwing it out there and putting it in people's faces. And so what do we need to continue doing, moving forward? Do you think there's anything more we should be doing to increase advocacy for tiny homes?
I mean, I'm pretty sure this might go across the board, but anybody who's interested in a tiny home just needs to keep banging on their municipality's door. It's a matter of time before, things change. And our whole goal here is to eventually try and flood the market with these tiny homes, the affordability of it. And if we do that, then we'll eventually help drive the cost of a traditional house down. Because you get enough of these in the market and people are only buying these. Well, I mean, they won't have a choice but to hopefully bring the cost of houses down. So you just got to keep, we as a company as well are just going to keep banging on our people who need to know. And thankfully we live in a pretty receptive area, Ontario being as a little bit behind as they are in terms of the tiny home movement. We're fortunate that we've been talking to and working with the right people who are receptive and like the whole idea as well. So,
and I think to build on that, it's working with the planners, because the board and your municipality, your councils are going to go to your planners because they're the ones who are giving them the guidance and that education. And so if we can break down the planners and really start working with some of them, at least in our area. I know that, yes, the municipal council and them pushing on it is helpful, but I feel like the planners still have, a big say in that too. So if there's a way to help get planners on board to say, yes, this is a good idea, this is viable, this is, we should be looked at, then I think that way will help as well.
Definitely, and everything will help like that. What's that, Pamela?
Yeah. Well, I'm just going to emphasize on what Adrienne's saying. Yes, the planning department. I've been speaking with the planning department and, giving them information and working with them for almost 5 years with no avail. I don't believe it's strictly the planning department. I think we need to educate our building inspectors. They're the ones that do the passing of all the things. So planning departments, in my experience, even Edmonton, they rolled out this great thing, got everybody really excited because, hey, tiny houses are a solution. And they did all this rigmarole, and then the building department's like, nah, we're not signing off on that. So it's like they're the stalemates of the situation. So that's why we're working with ASTM and ANSI and taking and building off of things that are existing already, and also, kind of collaborating and creating something so that the building inspectors can buy into it. So those are the things that in my journey that I've learned. So I think that's why everybody's going to BATS and creating, all of the information, building a plan, good presentation, taking what's existing and kind of piecemealing everything together, but also, calling it something completely in its own entity. So yeah, I think moving forward, connecting and trying to get all these masterminds to kind of go in one similar direction. We do have all these little pockets of everybody, doing some things, and eventually they all kind of interconnect, which is great. So places like, panels like this, it's information, it's reaching out, and, you can get a hold of me or you can get a hold of Josh, and, we can all start working collaboratively together. So the Tiny Home Alliance Canada, I think, is a good hub for that. And having that maybe be a resource or accessible on the website would also be beneficial. So maybe there'll be something a little more tangible once a few more stages of this sort of exercise continues.
Mm-hmm.
So there'll be something that there'll be, you know, right now it's kind of like a word of mouth but a really sort of a solid, you know, hub or something. So anyway, that's just my.
You know, I think Neil deGrasse Tyson said it best when he said, if you really want to do something truly impactful, it requires a community of people heading all in the same direction, all with the same passion, all focused in the same at the same end goal. And I think we're coalescing that at the moment, where we're in that gray area where that sort of thing is coalescing right now. And we're really working towards that, you know, and that's the reason why Tiny Home Alliance now is starting this sort of more collaboration with our business partners, more collaboration, hopefully with our community members. We want to give more to our community so that they can go out and feel good and passionate about advocating for the community. And because as we all know, the louder your voice, the less power the government and municipalities and the bureaucrats have. And so all we have to do is be louder for longer than them, and we win. And that's really all it takes. And so that's kind of what we're doing. So with that, I think we're going to bring this webinar today, this event, to an end. So I just want to thank everybody who joined us today from wherever you may be. I really hope this conversation was both entertaining and educational. Thanks so much to our panelists for your time. Thanks for your energy. Everybody, be sure to follow us on your favorite social media platforms. They're listed on our websites and our other social media platforms. Make sure you subscribe to us on Patreon. We have a Patreon page now where we are now taking subscriptions, and there's something there for everybody. It makes it really, really easy to be an advocate and help support Tiny Home Alliance Canada. And you get exclusive access to future events, content, and maybe even a bit of swag. So future events, for example, going forward will be paid events, but if you're a subscribed member, you get events for free. You continue to get events for free. So make sure everybody check out that Patreon page, help support Tiny Home Alliance. So thanks again to everyone, and we'll see you guys at the next event. So bye for now.